I've been driving for Uber for 3 years now, mostly nights because the pay is better, and I'm a bit of an insomniac anyway. You see all kinds of people when you're out there in the dark: drunk college kids, shift workers heading home, people having affairs they think nobody knows about. Most of the time, it's just transportation. Get them from point A to point B, collect your 5 stars, move on. But there was this one night in October that still keeps me up sometimes, even though I've always had trouble sleeping. It started like any other Thursday. I'd been driving since about 9 p.m, caught the usual crowd leaving the bars downtown. Around 2 a.m, things always slow down, and I was thinking about calling it a night when I got a ping from an address I didn't recognize. It was way out in the suburbs, one of those developments where all the houses look exactly the same. The pickup was at 847 Maple Grove Lane. I pulled up to this beige 2-story house with a small front yard and a driveway that needed repaving. All the lights were off, except for a single lamp in what looked like the living room window. I sat there for a minute, checking my phone to make sure I had the right address, when the front door opened. A woman walked out, probably in her 40s, wearing a long, dark coat. She had brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and was carrying a small purse. Nothing unusual about her appearance, but something about the way she moved seemed careful, like she was trying not to make any noise. She got in the back seat and said, "Thank you for coming so quickly." Her voice was quiet, almost whispered. "No problem," I said, glancing at the app. "Looks like we're heading to Mercy General Hospital." "Yes, that's right." I pulled away from the curb and started driving. The hospital was about 20 minutes away, mostly highway. For the first few minutes, she didn't say anything, just stared out the window. I kept checking the rearview mirror because something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Everything okay?" I finally asked. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not have heard me. Then she said, "My husband is in the hospital. He's been there for 3 days now." "I'm sorry to hear that. Emergency." "You could say that." She paused, then added, "He fell down the stairs." The way she said it made me glance back at her again. She was still staring out the window, but I could see her reflection in the glass. Her expression was completely blank. We drove in silence for another few minutes. I had the radio on low, just some late-night talk show, but it felt too quiet in the car. That's when I noticed she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. "Mom, you might want to buckle up," I said. She looked down at her lap as if she'd forgotten where she was. "Oh, yes, thank you." But she didn't put it on. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead now instead of out the window. I was starting to feel uncomfortable. There's an instinct you develop as a driver. You learn to read people, to sense when something's not right. Every alarm bell in my head was going off, but I couldn't figure out why. She wasn't threatening, wasn't acting erratically. If anything, she was too calm. "Have you been to see him yet?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Your husband, I mean." "No," she said. "This is my first visit." 3 days, you said? That's a long time to wait." She turned to look at me then, and I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. They were completely empty, not sad, not worried, not tired, just nothing. "I needed time to think," she said. We were on the highway now, passing under streetlights that threw moving shadows across the car. I noticed she had her hands pressed flat against her thighs and her knuckles were white. Think about what? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. About what I'm going to say to him when he wakes up. Something in her tone made my skin crawl. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say he might have some memory loss from the head injury. She paused. They said he might not remember exactly what happened. I slowed down as we approached the hospital exit. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. That might be a blessing, I said, trying to sound casual. Sometimes it's better not to remember traumatic things. She laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was quiet and cold, like wind through dead leaves. Yes, she said, sometimes it is. We pulled into the hospital parking lot. It was mostly empty at this hour, just a few cars scattered around under the harsh fluorescent lights. I parked near the main entrance and turned around to face her. Here we are, I said, but she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the hospital entrance. Mom, we're here. I know. She opened her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, even though the fare was only $12. Keep the change. She got out of the car and started walking toward the entrance. I should have driven away then, but something made me stay. I watched her through the glass doors as she walked up to the information desk. The security guard pointed her toward the elevators. That's when I noticed her coat. As she walked away from the desk, the coat opened slightly, and I could see dark stains on her shirt underneath. At first I thought it might be coffee or something, but the stains were too dark, too extensive. I sat there for another minute, trying to decide what to do. Then I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she talked about her husband's memory loss, like it was convenient. The stains on her shirt, the fact that she'd waited 3 days to visit him. The next morning, I found myself checking the local news online. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. But I kept thinking about those empty eyes. I found the story buried in the back pages of the newspaper's website. Local man in critical condition after fall. The article was brief, just a few sentences about how a 43-year-old man had fallen down the stairs in his home and was in intensive care with a severe head injury. Police were investigating, but no foul play was suspected. His name was David Chen. He lived at 847 Maple Grove Lane. I stared at the screen for a long time. The article mentioned that he was married, but it didn't give his wife's name. It said he was found at the bottom of the stairs by a neighbor who heard shouting and came to check on him. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that people fall downstairs all the time. But I couldn't shake the image of her sitting in my back seat, talking about his memory loss like it was a gift. 3 days later, I saw another article. Man dies from fall injuries. David Chen had passed away without regaining consciousness. The article was even shorter this time. It mentioned that he was survived by his wife, but again, no name was given. I never heard from the police. I never reported what I'd seen, partly because I wasn't sure what I'd seen. A woman visiting her husband in the hospital. A woman with stains on her shirt that could have been anything. A woman who seemed a little too calm. But I think about her sometimes, especially on nights when I'm driving and it's quiet and dark. I think about how she'd waited 3 days to visit him, how she talked about his memory loss, how she'd laughed when I said it might be better not to remember traumatic things. I think about how she'd said she needed time to think about what she was going to say to him when he woke up. And I wonder if she ever got the chance to say it. I drive for Uber, mostly on weekends, trying to make some extra money to pay off my student loans. I'm usually pretty good with faces. You have to be when you're picking up strangers all the time. But this one passenger, I started noticing him because he was just there. A lot. His name was Marcus, according to the app. Mid-30s, average height, always wore the same brown jacket. He never talked much, just got in, said hello, and stared out the window. The first few times I picked him up, I thought it was just coincidence. San Francisco isn't that big, and if you drive the same areas regularly, you're bound to see repeat customers. But after a while, I realized it wasn't random. Marcus was requesting rides every few days, always at night, always alone. The weird part was his destinations. They were never the same twice, but they were always residential neighborhoods, not downtown or commercial areas where you'd expect someone to be going for work or entertainment. Just random streets in quiet neighborhoods. The first time I really paid attention was on a Tuesday night in November. I picked him up outside a 24-hour diner on Geary Street. He got in the back seat, said hello in his usual quiet voice, and gave me an address in the Richmond district. "You heading home?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Something like that," he said. We drove through the foggy streets, past rows of identical houses with their porch lights on. When we got to the address, it was just another residential street. No bars, no restaurants, no obvious reason for someone to be going there at 11 p.m. "This is it," I said, pulling over. He sat there for a moment, looking out at the houses. "Actually," he said, "could you drive around the block once?" Slowly. I thought it was an odd request, but I'd had stranger ones. Maybe he was looking for a specific house number, or trying to remember which one was his friend's place. "Sure," I said. We drove slowly around the block. Marcus pressed his face to the window, studying each house as we passed. Most of them were dark, but a few had lights on in upstairs windows. When we completed the loop, he had me stop at the original address. "Thanks," he said, getting out. He tipped me $5, which was generous for a short ride. I thought about it for a few days, but eventually forgot about the incident. Then I picked him up again the following week, this time from a different location, but with the same pattern. Quiet residential neighborhood, late at night, and when we arrived, he asked me to drive around the block slowly. This time, I paid more attention to what he was doing. He wasn't just looking at the houses, he was studying them. I could see him in the rearview mirror, and his eyes were focused, intense. He was looking at the windows, the driveways, the cars parked outside, like he was memorizing everything. "You know someone in this neighborhood?" I asked. "Not exactly," he said. After that, I started recognizing his name when ride requests came through. It was happening more frequently now, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. Always late at night, always to residential areas I'd never heard of. Always with the same request to drive around the block slowly. I should have stopped accepting his rides. Every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong, but the tips were good. And honestly, I needed the money. Plus, he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. Weird, yes. Illegal, no. The pattern continued for about a month. Then one night in December, I picked him up from the same diner on Geary Street. This time, when I looked at the destination address, I recognized it. It was the same street where I'd taken him 3 weeks earlier. "Back to the Richmond district," I said. "That's right." When we got there, he didn't ask me to drive around the block. Instead, he had me park across the street from a small blue house with white trim. All the lights were off except for one in an upstairs window. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be right back." He got out of the car and walked across the street. I watched him go up to the front door and try the handle. It was locked. Then he walked around to the side of the house and disappeared into the shadows. I sat there with the engine running, my heart pounding. This was clearly not normal. I should have driven away, should have called the police. But I was frozen, trying to decide what to do. About 10 minutes later, Marcus came back. He got in the car like nothing had happened. "Okay," he said. "We can go now." "Go where?" I asked. "Just drive. I'll tell you when to stop." We drove aimlessly through the neighborhood for about 20 minutes. Marcus didn't say anything, just stared out the window with this satisfied expression on his face. Finally, he had me drop him off at a bus stop on a busy street. "Thanks," he said, handing me a $20 bill. "I appreciate your patience." I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The next morning, I almost called the police, but what would I say? A passenger got out of my car and walked around the house. That's not exactly a crime. But I decided I wouldn't pick him up anymore. When his ride requests came through, I declined them. I didn't want to be part of whatever he was doing. The problem was, he must have figured out that I was avoiding him, because he started requesting rides with different names. At first, I didn't realize it was him. The names were different: Robert, Stephen, Michael. But the pickup locations were always the same general area, and the destinations were always residential neighborhoods. It took me a few weeks to realize what was happening. The passengers looked like Marcus, but they were using different names in the app. Same brown jacket, same quiet demeanor, same request to drive slowly around the block. I started declining those rides too, but then I began to worry. If he was using fake names, what else was he hiding? And why was he so determined to keep taking rides with me specifically? One night in January, I got a ride request from David to pick up at the diner on Geary Street. I almost declined it automatically, but something made me accept it instead. I decided I needed to know what Marcus was really doing. When I pulled up to the diner, he was waiting outside. He got in the back seat and gave me an address in the Sunset District. "Hi, David," I said, emphasizing the name. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "I know you've been avoiding me," he said finally. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was calm, but there was something different about it, sharper. "I specifically request you as my driver. Did you know that? The app has that feature." I didn't respond. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter. "I like you," he continued. "You're discreet. You don't ask too many questions. That's a valuable quality." We drove in silence for a few minutes. When we reached the address, it was another quiet residential street. This time, Marcus didn't ask me to drive around the block. He just sat there, studying the houses. "Do you want to know what I'm doing?" he asked. Not really, I said. He laughed. That's what I like about you, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I think you deserve to know. I'm a researcher. I study people's routines, their habits. When they come home, when they leave, when they turn their lights off. It's fascinating, really. Everyone thinks they're so private, but if you watch long enough, you can learn everything about someone. That's, I started to say, but he cut me off. I know what you're thinking. It sounds creepy, but I'm not doing anything harmful. I'm just observing, learning. Some people watch birds, I watch people. Why do you need a driver for that? Because walking around neighborhoods at night draws attention. But sitting in a car, that's normal. No one pays attention to an Uber driver. We sat there for another few minutes while he studied the houses. Then he directed me to drop him off at the same bus stop as before. I'll see you next week, he said as he got out. But I didn't see him next week, or the week after that. His ride requests stopped coming through, and I started to think maybe he'd found a different driver to use for his research. Then one night in February, I was driving home after a long shift when I passed the blue house in the Richmond district, the one where I'd watched Marcus try the door handle. There were police cars in the driveway, their red and blue lights flashing. I slowed down and saw officers leading a man in handcuffs toward one of the cars. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was wearing a brown jacket. The next morning, I found the story in the local news. A man had been arrested for breaking into homes in several San Francisco neighborhoods. The police said he had detailed notes about the residents' daily routines and had been planning the break-ins for months. They'd caught him inside a house in the Richmond district, where the homeowner had woken up and called 911. The man's name was Marcus Chen. He was 34 years old and worked as a data analyst. I never told the police about driving him around all those times. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I felt complicit somehow, like I'd helped him without knowing it. Or maybe because I was scared of what might happen if they found out I'd been part of it, even unknowingly. But sometimes I wonder about all those other houses, all those other neighborhoods where I drove him around slowly while he studied the windows and memorized the routines of people who had no idea they were being watched. And I wonder if Marcus was the only one doing this, or if there are others out there using rideshare drivers as unwitting accomplices in their own strange research projects. I still drive for Uber, but now I pay more attention to my passengers. I ask more questions, and if someone wants me to drive slowly around a residential block at night, I tell them no, because you never know who's watching or why. I need to tell someone about this, and I figure an anonymous post online is probably the safest way. I've been driving for Uber for about 2 years, and what happened last month has made me think about quitting altogether. It was a Saturday night, probably around 2:30 a.m. I was working late because I needed the surge pricing money. My daughter's daycare costs have been killing me since my wife went back to school. I just dropped off a group of college kids downtown when I got a ping for a pickup in North Portland, out in one of those newer developments where all the houses look like they were made from the same 3 blueprints. The address was 1247 Cedar Hills Drive. I'd never been to that particular street before, but I'd driven through the neighborhood plenty of times. It's one of those places where young families move when they want good schools and safe streets. The kind of place where people still leave their porch lights on and know their neighbors' names. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed it was completely dark. No porch light, no interior lights, nothing. That struck me as odd, especially since it was the middle of the night and someone had just requested a ride. I sat there for a minute, checking my phone to make sure I had the right address. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with a small front yard and a circular driveway. There was a Honda Civic parked in the driveway, and I could see a child's bicycle lying on its side near the garage door. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that the house was completely dark. I was about to call the passenger when the front door opened. A woman came out, moving quickly across the lawn toward my car. She was maybe 35, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, carrying a small overnight bag. Even in the darkness, I could tell she was upset about something. Her movements were jerky, urgent. She got into the back seat and immediately said, "Please, can we just go? I'll give you the address once we're moving." "Sure," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer right away. I could see her in the rearview mirror, looking back at the house as we drove away. She was crying, but trying to hide it. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I know this is weird. I needed to get out of there." "No problem. Take your time." We drove in silence for a few minutes while she composed herself. The neighborhood was completely quiet. No other cars, no lights in any of the houses. Just empty streets and the occasional street light. "Can you take me to the airport?" she asked. "Of course. PDX." "Yeah." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know it's far. I'll pay extra for the long trip." The airport was about a 40-minute drive from where we were. I reset my GPS and started heading toward the freeway. "Flying somewhere nice?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "My sister's house in Phoenix." She paused. "I should have left earlier. I should have left weeks ago." There was something in her voice that made me glance back at her. She was staring out the window, but her hands were clenched into fists in her lap. "Sometimes it takes time to make difficult decisions," I said. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You have no idea." We got on the freeway and traffic was light. Just a few long-haul truckers and other late-night drivers. The woman, her name was Sarah, according to the app, seemed to relax a little once we were moving faster. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Do you think people can really change? Like fundamentally change who they are?" It was a heavy question for 3 a.m., but I'd had stranger conversations with passengers. "I think people can change their behavior," I said, "but changing who you are at your core, that's harder." She nodded. "That's what I thought." "Is this about whoever you're leaving behind?" "My husband." She was quiet for a moment. "We've been married for 8 years. I thought I knew him." I didn't say anything, just kept driving. Sometimes passengers need to talk, and sometimes they need silence. I was getting the sense that Sarah needed to talk. "He's been having these episodes," she continued. "That's what I called them. Episodes. Like something switches in his brain, and he becomes someone else entirely." "That sounds frightening." "It is. The first time it happened, I thought he was having some kind of breakdown. Work stress, maybe. But then it kept happening, and I started to realize it wasn't random. There were triggers." We passed a sign for the airport, 25 miles. I found myself hoping the conversation would continue. Not because I was nosy, but because Sarah seemed like she needed to get this out, and I might be the only person who would listen. "What kind of triggers?" I asked. Anything that made him feel like he wasn't in control. If I disagreed with him about something, or if our daughter didn't obey him immediately, or if someone at work questioned his decisions. Little things that most people would just brush off. How long has this been going on? 2 years, maybe 3. Started small, just verbal stuff. Yelling, saying cruel things. But it got worse. She touched her left wrist, and I noticed it was wrapped in a bandage. Last week, he grabbed me so hard he sprained my wrist. And tonight, she trailed off, staring out the window. What happened tonight? Our daughter, Emma, she's 7. She spilled juice on his laptop. It was an accident, but he just lost it. Completely lost it. He started screaming at her, calling her names. Terrible names. Things you should never say to a child. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I have a 6-year-old daughter myself, and the thought of someone screaming at her like that made me sick. I tried to intervene, Sarah continued, and he pushed me down, hard. Emma was crying, and I was on the floor, and he was standing over both of us with this look in his eyes, like he didn't even recognize us. Did you call the police? Number I should have, but I didn't. I just grabbed Emma and took her to my neighbor's house. Told them it was a family emergency and asked if she could stay the night. Then I came home and packed a bag. What about your daughter? Is she safe? She's with my neighbor. I'll call them from Phoenix and arrange for Emma to fly out to meet me. I have money saved up. I've been planning this for months. I just didn't know when. We were getting close to the airport now. I could see the lights in the distance. I'm proud of you, I said. It takes courage to leave. Does it? Or am I just running away? You're protecting yourself and your daughter. That's not running away. That's being responsible. She was quiet for the rest of the drive. When we pulled up to the departure terminal, she handed me a $50 bill, even though the fare was only $38. Thank you, she said, for listening, for not judging. Take care of yourself, Sarah, and your daughter. She got out of the car and walked toward the terminal entrance, pulling her overnight bag behind her. I watched her until she disappeared through the sliding glass doors. I drove home thinking about her story, about her husband's episodes, about that 7-year-old girl who'd been screamed at for spilling juice. I hoped Sarah would be okay, hoped she'd be able to start over somewhere safe. But then, about a week later, I got another ride request. Same area of North Portland, same time of night. The pickup address was 1247 Cedar Hills Drive. I almost declined the ride, but curiosity got the better of me. When I pulled up to the house, a man was waiting on the front porch. He was about 40, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He looked normal, professional, the kind of guy you'd see at a school board meeting or coaching Little League. He got in the front seat, which was unusual. Most passengers sit in the back. "Good evening," he said. His voice was calm, friendly. "Thanks for coming so late." "No problem. Where are we headed?" "The airport, please. I have an early flight." I started driving, but something felt wrong. The man was too calm, too friendly. And there was something else. A faint smell in the car, like cleaning chemicals. "Business trip?" I asked. "Family trip, actually. My wife and daughter are already there visiting relatives. I'm flying out to meet them." I glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, hands folded in his lap. His wedding ring caught the light from the dashboard. "That's nice," I said. Family time is important. It is. We've been having some challenges lately, but I think a change of scenery will help. We drove in silence for a while. I kept thinking about Sarah, about her story, about the way she described her husband's episodes. This man seemed nothing like the violent, unpredictable person she described. He was polite, well-spoken, calm. But then I remembered something Sarah had said. Something switches in his brain and he becomes someone else entirely. "Is your family excited to see you?" I asked. "Oh yes, especially my daughter. She's been asking for me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She's 7, very attached to her daddy. My blood ran cold. Sarah had mentioned her daughter was 7. "That's a great age," I managed to say. "It is, though she can be difficult sometimes. Children need discipline, structure. My wife doesn't always understand that." I realized my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. This was him. This was Sarah's husband, the man who'd screamed at a 7-year-old for spilling juice, who'd pushed his wife to the floor, who'd made them both so afraid they had to flee in the middle of the night. "Do you know what terminal?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Terminal B, Southwest Airlines." I knew I should keep my mouth shut, should just drive him to the airport and let him go. But I couldn't stop thinking about Emma, about Sarah's description of her husband standing over them with that look in his eyes. "Your wife and daughter," I said. "Are they expecting you at a specific time?" He turned to look at me, and for just a moment, I saw something else in his expression, something cold and calculating. "Why do you ask?" "Just making conversation. Some people like to surprise their families." He stared at me for a long moment, then he smiled again. But this time it was different, predatory. "I think," he said slowly, "that they'll be very surprised to see me." We pulled up to the airport terminal. He got out of the car and leaned down to the passenger window. "Thank you for the ride," he said. "I hope you have a good rest of your evening." As he walked away, I noticed he didn't have any luggage. No suitcase, no carry-on bag, nothing. Just a man in business casual clothes, walking into an airport at 3 a.m. with empty hands. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. Then I called 911. I told them about Sarah, about her story, about the man I'd just dropped off, who claimed to be flying to meet his wife and daughter, who'd already left him. I gave them his description, told them which terminal he'd gone to. I don't know what happened after that. I never heard back from the police, never saw any news stories about it. But I hope they found him before he got on that plane. And I hope Sarah and Emma are somewhere safe, somewhere far away from a man who could switch between charming and terrifying with no warning at all. I still drive for Uber, but I pay attention now. I listen to what people tell me, even when they don't realize they're telling me anything at all. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most normal. And sometimes a ride to the airport isn't just a ride to the airport, it's a hunt.